cycles, cycles of connection, cycles of separation. And as many of us experience on a path, there are times where we feel deeply connected and resonant and attuned to our practice, to the path itself, and also to that which is beyond us and beyond the path. And then we feel perhaps moments where we can't sense that anymore for a while, for a time. Our inner, sort of what we might call our inner shadow, our traumas, our wounds, dissatisfactions arise, and we feel separate and it's hard to get back. Those are usually times where we almost grieve the loss of our practice. And yet, this is so natural to all of us to come sort of apart from these resources, these supports, and then come back together with them and then come apart. It's almost like a double helix, a DNA double helix. And we just sort of spiral up and down. So if you experience this at all, this is actually, you're in really good company. And one of the reasons why we want to pay attention to the gravity, the heaviness, where we feel separate, rather than just avoid it and numb ourselves back into some stimulation, which is, again, something all of us do. Maybe we'll watch a really loud James Bond movie or, something just to make us feel alive again. This is not uncommon. If you're like me, you'll dream of bathing in a sea of chocolate at a sunset. And then I'll go watch the James Bond movie. So, anyway, um, working with energy, working with the subtle physiology, ancient traditions, thousands of years old. Some people would say a good 4,000 years old in working with um, subtle physiology, with the winds, quote unquote, the prana in the body, the energy of breath that is not just air, but imbued with life giving qualities that lead to our vitality and flourishing. So, there are practices, of course, in yoga and yogic practices and the tantras and pranayamas. In Tibetan Buddhism, in Vajrayana, we find practices that are called Tsa Lung. This is a Tibetan compound word, Tsa Lung, which literally means wind channel. Um, it's what we might also call breathing exercise. That's probably a more functional definition, but literally it means wind channel, working with the energy, with the winds in the body. Um, and so, how we engage with the heaviness, with the things, or maybe it's an overabundance of energy. In mindfulness practice, we're taught by the Buddha in his teaching, in the mindfulness teaching, to simply notice mindfully if a sensation you're having is pleasant or unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant. If you're noticing heaviness, if you're noticing the parts of the body, so we sort of progress through various stages of practice, and including noticing feelings and practicing some equanimity and some kindness when feelings arise, when heaviness arises. And for many people, to simply sit in meditation, this certainly has been my experience in the past. I may sit and I may notice things arising, things dispersing, and yet I may be sitting with a heaviness. I may be sitting with a density, an emotional density that just doesn't seem to lift with my practice. And yes, maybe it does feel better, the ease of breath and mindful settling is very helpful. And yet we may not know what is it that is in our space that's causing this. This is where then moving into the fourth stage of mindfulness, which is vipassana, is getting to know the patterns, getting to know what is there, and having proper view, seeing all of these things as impermanent, and not trying to control them or do anything, but allowing them to lift on their own. I personally have found that, of course, very helpful. And this is a yes and, not a yes but, doing the breathing practices to help metabolize quickly certain kinds of density and energy in the physical body, in the emotional body, if you will, that just seems relentless. I've had times where in the past I would go on a retreat and I just couldn't shake whatever was there. Often it was something that was arising by practicing, and then it wouldn't go away. And then over the years, actually over the decades at this point, um, practicing with pranayama, with chakras, which we're not going to do tonight, but we can do that soon. The energy centers in the body, and doing this thing called purification breathing. We've done spinal breath before, which is another really helpful breath to relinquish certain energies. But purification breath specifically in the Tibetan tradition works to really sort of focus on three sort of categories of experience. One are aversions, the things that are negative, that are what we might call imbued in ill will, and things like anger and fear and anxiety, um, resentment, cynicism. There's a whole sort of range of these things. So, what we might sort of use as a broad brush, aversions and negativity. And the second one is the opposite of that polarity: attachment, clinging, greediness, neediness. Um, what else? Sort of sensual pleasures, kind of the clinging, and also scarcity. Things like feeling as if there isn't enough. This is also part of neediness, right? As well as desire, worry, those kinds of things, addictions. These are all part of that whole sort of attachment and clinging. And then the third, sense of dullness, of avoidance, of apathy, or just simply checking out because it's just too hard to sort of hold this enormous energy that these kinds of thoughts take for us to hang on to. Blind pride is another one that's often associated with this third category. Um, Here, what we're looking at is the three poisons in Buddhism. We're looking at these afflictions that are kind of the roots of suffering: greed, hatred, and delusion. So, greed being all of the attachment and the clinging and the addicting, hatred being the negativity, the aversions, and delusion being really everything else, right? It's all the illusory things, the confusion in life, the apathy, the checking out. Um, and so, this practice of purification breathing really seeks to help us clear a bit these three categories. And we haven't quite done the full practice like we're going to do tonight. We've done sort of the preliminaries before, um, and those are on YouTube. I think one or two videos that I've posted on that. Here, we're going to kind of take it a little bit more deeply and stretch the practice into an overall meditation to kind of dive in and relinquish using a little bit of imagery. The the out breath. So we begin by focusing on negativity and aversions. And as we breathe out, we're focusing on breathing out all of those things as a sort of a smoky gray, sooty, smoky quality, um, and letting that dissolve into clear white light. And so this visual being around us, this sort of luminous quality around us. The second one in this visualization is the clinging and the addictiveness, the attachment, breathing it out of us in the form of of a dark red burgundy soot-like color, smoky into clear red light. And then the third one, breathing out dullness, delusion, apathy, avoidance as dark blue, smoky quality into bright blue, almost like bright blue open skylight. And so these three colors, white, red, and blue, as interesting as it is that they match our national flag, if you're in the country, um, are very common actually in Tibetan Buddhist meditation practices. Yeah. So if we've done the three vajras before, it's very similar. The three colors: the white light here, the red light in the throat, and the blue light in the heart. So this is a sort of slightly different practice, but um, sort of same ends. Yeah. All right. Well, the idea here, and I'll say one last thing here, is to begin to relinquish the polarities, to relinquish the dualities that we are constantly embroiled in. You know, the polarity between suffering and pleasure, and the need for pleasure and the kind of desire to be free of pain, otherwise checking out, being exhausted by it all, and move us through that to relinquish, to clear, so that we can experience sort of a more open sense of non-duality, a sense of presence that abides in simply awareness itself, without all that clutter. So this is where this practice is aiming for us to go. What we might call abiding more in a state of emptiness, um, perhaps better put as profound openness.